What a joyful service. I love Pride. I feel like that about so many of our services, though. So, in fitting with our theme of Strong Future this month for our Pride service, I want to celebrate queer futures. Because let's face it, we need those visions of having a future. I'm not going to get into all the legislation that's either been enacted or proposed that denies queer people the possibility of a full future. Instead, I want to talk about the liberatory message of queerness, of what queerness can offer all of us, of a future informed by queerness. One of the things religions was designed to do and has done for all of eternity has imagined futures, both personal futures and global futures. Many faiths have beliefs about the afterlife, what happens to us after we die, and what happens at the end of the world. There's even a fancy religious word for it, eschatology. That is the theology that's related to death, the judgment, and the final destiny of the soul and humankind. We Unitarian Universalists see this a little differently than most. We don't actually care about what happens in another life after this one. We care about what happens in this life, on this planet, the only one we can influence. But historically, and this is important, our Universalist ancestors believed that no one went to hell. And so, this belief of our spiritual ancestors helped us to believe in the salvation of all people in this life. Our values and covenant embrace this. When we talk about equity, we declare that everyone has the right to flourish with inherent worth and dignity. Our new values actually use that word flourish, which I love. For us, of course, there is no question that this includes queer people, gay people, lesbians, trans people, bisexuals, agender people, intersex people, and everyone else that we could possibly think of. But LGBTQ people can't flourish in this way in much of the world. You see, I've often made a joke that I'm in the 1% of transgender people, where I live in a place and time where I'm not only able to live my truest life, but also to flourish in a job I love, where I'm able to be open about my identity, and have a wonderful family that I've been privileged to build. But there's an element of my experience that relates not to queer liberation, but queer assimilation. Okay, so I want to show you the very first time that I, as a child, experienced media that reflected some of the experiences I would have in my life. Yes, this comes from Star Trek: The Next Generation. For those of you who don't know, I'm a huge Trekkie, so it's coming out. The character we are about to see is named, funnily enough, Soren, the name of our music director, although we know he didn't name himself after that. It's from an alien race that no longer identifies with gender. However, Soren this character does identify with a gender, and the gender that she identifies with is female. And she strikes up a relationship with a man in the crew of the Starship Enterprise. And what happens is she ends up going on trial because she's not allowed to have this identity on her planet. So we're going to watch the speech that she gives after she goes on trial.
We have not injured you in any way.
Is it loud enough? Yes.
And
okay.
yet we are scorned and attacked. And all because we are different. What we do is no different from what you do. We talk and laugh. We talk about our families, and we worry about the future. And we cry with each other when things seem hopeless. All of the loving things that you do with each other, that is what we do. What right do you have to punish us? What right do you have to change us? What makes you think you can dictate how people love each other?
Okay, so I love how in science fiction you can kind of imagine a different reality and use that to explain something. Now, this episode came out in 1992, 32 years ago. And frankly, it was pretty revolutionary at the time, framing what we deem as normal, right, being a woman in a relationship with a man, as the persecuted relationship, right? And that's all wonderful. But there's something I'd like to criticize about it. It implies that to be accepted, we LGBTQ people have to be just like straight people. It implies that to be accepted, sorry, I just read that what we do is no different than what you do. That we should be respectable, quote unquote, normal. Of course, that was the whole idea, right, behind marriage equality. Who we are is no different than who you are. We gay people just want to get married and have our 2.5 kids. You want to just blend in, not cause any waves. The ideas in this episode and marriage equality fit us into this box of what's called heteronormativity. And that's the thing I want to say about my life. It is super heteronormative seeming. To the world, I might seem like just a normal guy with a wife and my two, albeit obviously adopted, children. Which has made blending in with straight society pretty easy for me. And I am happy about my life. Do not get me wrong. I feel good about it. But I think a true queer future doesn't and shouldn't rely on that kind of blending in to be able to flourish. In fact, I think that kind of expectation of heteronormativity can be damaging to all of us, LGBTQ+, or not. What would it look like for us to queer the future? What would a liberatory idea of this future, this queer future, be like? Where we weren't subjected to the pressures of society. Our reading this morning gives us a glimpse into that. How many times have you heard about sexuality and gender, this idea of it not being a choice, right? It's a narrative that's really prevalent even in the LGBTQ community itself. It's something that has been used as a way and said as a way of asking straight cisgender people to accept us. We can't help it, we say. As if being a choice has anything to do with whether or not we should be accepted. A queer future imagines that all of us, queer or not, have agency over what we do with our bodies. That being gay or trans may be innate, or it may be a choice, but that's not why we should be accepted. That's not why we should be celebrated. A true queer future questions these assumptions, and so many more, in ways that might be uncomfortable, but are also beautiful. The very term itself, queer, which I want to acknowledge does not feel good to everyone. It's a reclamation of a slur that was thrown at gay people. It means strange or odd, and it was a way to mark sexual deviance. Claiming that word back is a way of saying, yes, I am queer. Yes, perhaps I am strange to you or a sexual deviant, but I'm good with that. In fact, I embrace it. When the word queer began to be reclaimed, it was the early 1990s, the same time as this Star Trek episode. And it was a response, particularly from Black and brown gay people, to what's called this assimilation into heteronormativity. The idea that gay people are just straight people who happen to like the same gender. Andrew Sullivan, a gay conservative, first advocated for gay marriage in 1989 in an article titled, "Here Comes the Groom, the Conservative Case for Gay Marriage." And if you think about it, it is quite the conservative idea, especially at a time when the government was ignoring the AIDS crisis that was very much impacting the gay community. Gay marriage was perhaps acceptable in a way to advocate for. a respectable thing. Addressing a disease that men got for having sex with each other, not so much. But let's be real. It's been this way for a while. Gay marriage, adoption, military service. LGBT people have wanted these things that coincide with conservative values. And that, because there's a desire, right, to fit in, because it makes it easier for us to be accepted in a way. But there is a gift in queerness that helps us not to fit in, that forces us to question the assumptions we've been given. And that is the queer future that I'm interested in. A queer future that can benefit all of us. So let me tell you a bit about what being queer means to me. Being queer is being able to tell people I'm transgender from the pulpit of a church. Being queer helped me realize that I could take my wife's name when I got married. Being queer gets me to question why I got married at all. Being queer allows me to explain how babies are made in an inclusive way to my children. Being queer means I can talk about sex from the pulpit. Being queer is my tattoos and my beard and my bald head. Being queer is rethinking the future of what this church is. Being queer is sharing our pronouns before we talk. Being queer is reconfiguring my mind so that they, ze, per are part of my speech. Being queer means that I can recognize that poly relationships are just as valid as my own. Being queer means name changes can happen. Being queer allows me to be every one of the letters of LGBTQ at different times of my life. How's that for coming out? Being queer is the greatest gift of my life. And you don't have to be queer to do many of these things. But for me, if I wasn't queer, I wouldn't do them. You see, I've always been a rule follower, a person who's wanted to assimilate and blend in. So I thank God for my queerness, because it's helped me recognize that I need to question the norms and assumptions around me, even the ones that don't have anything to do with queerness. Gay cartoonist and author Alison Bechtel shares in her memoir, Are You My Mother?, about how glad she is that she's gay, because otherwise she never would have questioned anything. I'm a bit embarrassed to admit that that's me. I have no idea who I'd be if I wasn't queer. But I'm pretty sure I wouldn't be someone here at this church that is so queer, because it questions what it means to be a church, because it says you don't have to believe in the same God or even a God at all to worship together, because it loudly proclaims that you don't have to be perfect, because it includes the idea of many faiths. Yes, Unitarian Universalism is a queer faith, not because many of us are queer, though that may be true, but because we examine what it is to be a community of faith and discards the rules that don't work for us. I've heard it said about many UU churches, even this church, that there's a fear of us becoming the gay church. The assimilationist in me wants to say to the person and try to say to that person, did you see how many seemingly straight couples we had join our church last month? I try to tell them that the majority of people in the congregation identify as straight and cisgender, which is true. But the truth is that I need to stop that. Because of course we're a gay church. We're a queer church, and we should be. Because we are a place that embraces queer futures, that doesn't shy away from sharing all of who we are with each other and with our children, that will be teaching comprehensive sex ed to our children, and newsflash, maybe our adults, next year, that flies all sorts of pride flags, some of whom I don't even know what they mean, that uses all sorts of pronouns, that hears stories of all kinds of relationships. In this congregation, I have married people who are poly, who have had their other partners hold the huppah. I have presided over a queer platonic partnership in this very sanctuary. And I have seen people wear their queerest outfits every Sunday. And we've queered how we do church, because we let kids run around, because their noises are sacred, because we don't have to be quiet here. That's right, Karen. Yeah. Because we've included interpretive dance to ask you for money. Because we've literally napped as part of worship service. We joke sometimes that we say our service today is different than usual, about 50% of the time. That is queering how you do religion. That is one of the ways that we are looking at a queer future. And you are part of that, whether you are queer or not. In contrast to this respectable queer future of Star Trek: The Next Generation, I want to share with you a future from a book by Becky Chamberlain that we read in our book club. It's a book about a monk named Sibling Dex. Dex gets into a conversation with a robot about halfway through the book. This is a science fiction book, by the way. Obviously, I'm really into sci-fi. And the conversation in the book goes like this: I'm Dex. Do you have a gender? No. And then Dex says, me neither. The character of Dex has been using they, them pronouns throughout the book. And this is the first and only time it's directly addressed. And it's a non-issue for everyone they encounter. Dex has sexual relationships with people, but not ones that seem to develop into relationships, and they're totally fine with that. Now, of course, the whole point of the book is that humans have separated from sentient AI robots, and that Dex has to recognize the humanity of this robot. But they do so by relying on this lens of queerness, where to have no gender is totally normal, as is to have a gender. Sibling Dex talks about sister so-and-so and brother so-and-so. And it rethinks how we do everything, from religion to relationships. A queer future that is liberatory and not fighting anymore, simply existing alongside these more heteronormative ways of being. This is a future that we can imagine together, the future that I want to live in. And despite all the political fights and the tactics to try to oppress the queerness in us, we will win in the end. Throughout history, there have many who have fit what we call queerness today. Two-spirit individuals in Native American communities. Many African countries didn't have persecution of LGBTQ identities prior to European colonization and the conversion to Christianity. Thailand has long recognized a separate identity for transgender people. So these things are not unprecedented. So let's build it. Let's queer the future for all of our liberation. Will you join me? Will you join me? Yes? Yes. Amen? Amen. May it be so.